the foot of the Sierra Nevada, on the shore of a lake that dried up thousands of years ago, there are carvings cut into the rock, deep circles, zigzags, lines that bend like rivers. And when scientists finally put a date on them, the number came back so old they ran the test again, because they didn't believe it the first time. Older than the pyramids, older than Stonehenge, maybe 15,000 years. That isn't supposed to be possible. The textbook says nobody was carving stone in North America that long ago. So either the textbook is wrong, or somebody was up here in and around these mountains, doing something we have no record of and no name for. And here is the part that should bother you. That dried up lake bed is the one site we can actually date. Most of the others, we can't date at all. We can stand in front of them, photograph them, measure them to the millimeter, and still not tell you within thousands of years how old they are. All down the spine of the Sierra Nevada, there are carved panels, stone villages above the tree line, and figures aimed at the sky. Every one of them has been studied. Every one of them has been quietly filed under the same word, unexplained. There are 15 we're going to walk through tonight. And the question is never really what they mean. The question is how old they actually are, because every single time the experts answer, the number moves. It only ever moves one direction. Older. Number 15 is where it starts moving. Number 15, the Obsidian Trail, Owens Valley, California. Run your eye down the eastern wall of the Sierra Nevada, and you hit Owens Valley, a deep trough of land in the rain shadow of the high peaks. People have been moving through it for at least 12,000 years. We know that because of glass. Black volcanic glass, obsidian, that the people here flaked into blades sharper than a modern scalpel and traded outward in every direction. Pieces struck from these mountains have turned up as far away as Texas and Nebraska. Archaeologists have worked this valley for more than 50 years, and obsidian is how they read it, because each flow leaves a chemical fingerprint. Match the fingerprint, and you can trace where a tool was born and how far it traveled. It should be a solved story by now. It isn't. The deeper they dig, the older the trail runs, and there is still no clean first chapter, no bottom layer where you can say, here, this is where people first arrived. 12,000 years is just the floor we've reached so far. It is not the beginning. Old-timers in the valley will tell you the obsidian remembers the hand that worked it, that some pieces don't want to be picked up. It said you leave the ones that feel warm where they lie. Whatever you make of that, this much is true. A record that long, with no visible start, is exactly the kind of thing that makes a careful scientist choose their words slowly, which is the trouble with a record written in glass. You can hold it. You still can't read the first page, and the next site isn't written in glass at all. It's written on a cliff that nobody alive can read. Number 14, the North Fork Panels, Tahoe National Forest, California. High up the North Fork of the American River in the Northern Sierra, there are 46 separate sites where the granite has been carved. More than 1,000 individual symbols. They were made by a people archaeologists called the Martis, somewhere between roughly 1700 and 950 years before Christ, which puts the oldest of them in the same window as the building of Egypt. Here is the problem. The Martis are gone. Not relocated, not absorbed in any way we can cleanly trace, gone from the record. And the people who live in that country now, the Washoe, will tell you plainly that they don't know what the carvings mean. The meaning didn't get written down or handed on. It died with the hands that cut it. One researcher spent years overlaying the symbols onto contour maps and became convinced that some of the wavy lines are maps themselves. Trails, rivers, routes through the mountains. If he's right, then we are looking at directions. We just can't tell where they lead. It's said that one of those map lines points to a place people used to go and then stopped going. That somewhere up the drainage, there's a spot. The carvings route you toward and around at the same time, the way you draw a path that warns you off as much as it guides you. That's carving down along the river, where the water is. The next one was placed somewhere very different, somewhere only the mountain itself was ever meant to see it. Number 13, the Donner Summit. Petroglyphs, Donner Pass, California. Most people know Donner Pass for one grim winter in the 1840s, but the granite up on that summit was carved long before any wagon train ever struggled over it. Panels pecked into the bare rock that may run 3,500 years old. What stops the archaeologist isn't the age, it's the placement. These carvings break every rule you'd expect. They're never on a vertical cliff face. They're never on a standing boulder. They are always on flat, open bedrock, and every single one sits within 20 or 30 feet of a sweeping view of a major peak. Mount Lincoln, Tinker's Knob, Granite Chief. The man who first catalogued them noted that there was no exception to this. Not one. Whoever made them obeyed a placement rule so strict, it held across dozens of sites and untold generations. And nobody can tell you what the rule was for. Old-timers tell it the other way around. They say the people didn't choose those spots at all. The mountains chose them, that you carved where the peak could see you, and nowhere else, because being seen was the entire point. Carvings aimed at the peaks. Hold that thought, because the next site isn't aimed at a mountain. It's aimed at the sun, and it keeps perfect time. Number 12. The Swansea Equinox Stone, Inyo Mountains, California. Across the valley from the High Sierra, on the dry slopes of the Inyo Mountains, there's a petroglyph that does something a carving has no business doing. It tells time. Within 3 days of the equinox, and only then, the sun setting behind the Sierra crest throws a shadow across the stone. The shadow lands on a series of carved bars, and it moves. 1 bar per day, south in the spring, north in the fall. It is, in plain terms, a working calendar built out of rock and shadow and the exact angle of a mountain range. Researchers who've measured it find it accurate to within about 4 days. Somebody calibrated this thing. Somebody watched that horizon for years, understood precisely where the sun would fall and when, and cut the rock to catch it. And they left no math behind, no numbers, no record of the observation, nothing but the device itself, still running. We can use it. We cannot tell you who built it, or how many seasons of patient watching it took to get it right. It's said the shadow still keeps its time perfectly, every equinox, long after the last person who knew how to read it was gone. That the calendar outlived its calendar keepers and just kept counting. A calendar built into a hillside is strange enough. The next site is an entire town, built in a place no town should be able to survive. Number 11. The White Mountains High Altitude Villages, White Inyo Range, California. Look east from the Sierra Crest and you see another wall of mountains, the White Inyo Range. Just as high, but bone-dry, an alpine desert. For a long time, the assumption was simple. People went up there to hunt in summer and came back down. Nobody lived up there. You couldn't. Then the surveys found villages, real residential sites, above 10,000 feet, not hunting camps, not overnight stops, but places where people stayed. And the obsidian sourcing told an even stranger story. Before these villages appeared, the stone people used came from all over the region. After the villages took hold, it came overwhelmingly from one place, Owens Valley, far below. Something changed. A scattered, wandering pattern of life suddenly organized itself around living, year over year, in the thin and freezing air of a high desert. The question the archaeologists ask out loud is the one they can't answer. Why? Why move up into the cold and the wind when there was water and game in the valley? Were they pushed, pulled, hiding? Every explanation has a hole in it. It said the ones who went up to live didn't stay quite the same, and that the villages were left fast, abandoned in a season, not a slow fade. Which brings us down and inward to a valley that the textbook swore was empty. Number 10. Vermilion Valley, High Sierra, Fresno County, California. For most of the last century, archaeology had a firm rule about the High Sierra. Above 5,000 feet, the range was essentially empty in prehistory. Too steep, too cold, too poor in food. People passed through. They didn't stop. In the autumn of 1953, a team digging in Vermilion Valley, deep in the high country of Fresno County, found that the rule was wrong. The ground there was thick with the debris of human living, layer on layer of it. The residue of people who came back to the same high camps again and again over a very long span. Not a passing through, a returning. The Sierra had quietly broken one of the field's oldest assumptions, and it raised a worse question in its place. If we were this wrong about whether anyone lived up here, how wrong are we about how far back they go? Locals say there are camps still up there, in folds of the range no maintained trail reaches, that you can come over a pass into a basin and feel immediately and certainly that you are not the first person to stand there, and that whoever was won't be far. Vermilion Valley broke the textbook. The next entry is about a whole people who broke and then vanished off the map entirely. Number 9. The Martis culture, Northern Sierra Nevada, California. We met their carvings already up on the North Fork. Now meet the people, or as much of them as anyone can reconstruct. The Martis lived across the northern Sierra Nevada for something like 2,000 years. They left a heavy, distinctive tool-making style, panels of rock art, and a real footprint on the land. And then, somewhere in the record, they end. Where they went is genuinely unresolved. Whether the people who came after them, the Washoe, are their descendants, or simply the next group to move into empty country, is a question archaeologists still argue without a firm answer. 2,000 years of a culture with a clear beginning and a clear material signature, and an ending that nobody can explain. They didn't leave a war behind, or a plague, or a migration story we can follow. They just stop. It said the bear and the rattlesnake that show up again and again in their carvings were never decoration. That they were warnings, markers for things the Martis themselves were careful around, left for whoever came next to find and heed. A vanished people is unsettling. Carvings that may be older than the vanished people who supposedly made them, that's where this starts to come apart. Number 8. The Koso obsidian quarries, Eastern Sierra Edge, California. On the eastern flank of the Sierra system lies one of the most heavily worked stone tool quarries on the entire continent, the Koso source. For thousands of years, people came here to mine obsidian, and the scale of what they left behind is hard to take in. Not hundreds of flakes, not thousands, millions. Whole hillsides where the ground itself is made of the debris of toolmaking. That scale is the mystery. The picture we're usually given of the ancient Great Basin is small, mobile bands, a few families moving with the seasons. But the volume of work at Koso implies something organized on a different order entirely. Steady extraction over centuries, feeding obsidian out across the West in quantities that suggest planning, trade, and a workforce. The arithmetic of who did all of this and how it was coordinated doesn't close neatly against the small band model. Somebody was running an operation here. It said the ground at Koso still cuts anyone who digs into it, without asking first, that the place takes a little blood from the careless, the way it always has, with edges that were napped to draw it. Koso is a place worked too much. The next site is the opposite, a place that may have been worked for longer than anywhere else, and read like a forbidden book, one panel at a time. Number 7. Mount Irish, Eastern Sierra Basin, Nevada. Out in the Sierra's rain shadow, in the basin country of southern Nevada, a single desert mountain stands covered in carvings, thousands of them, clustered on the boulders of Mount Irish. The oldest are estimated at more than 3,000 years. Some researchers think the real range runs much further back than that. And there is the recurring wall this whole list keeps hitting. You cannot carbon date a carving. The rock is older than the carving, and the carving leaves no organic trace to test. So the dates at Mount Irish are built from indirect evidence, how the styles stack on top of each other, how weathered each layer looks, how they compare to dated sites elsewhere. The span that comes out is enormous. This mountain was a sacred place for thousands of years, drawing generation after generation back to the same stones. But the actual timeline is a chain of careful guesses, and the experts will tell you so themselves. It's said some of the panels there were never meant to be seen more than once, made for a single person on a single night, and then left to the weather, so that the act of carving mattered more than anyone ever looking at it again. A mountain carved across millennia is one kind of strange. A single panel of figures that don't look human is another, and that's exactly what waits at number 6. Number 6. The Koso patterned body figures, Koso Range, California. Back at Koso, not the quarry now, but the art. The Koso Range holds one of the densest concentrations of rock art found anywhere on Earth. Tens of thousands of images, and among the bighorn sheep and the hunting scenes are figures that stop people cold. Tall, rectangular, human-shaped but not human, their bodies filled with patterns, their heads strange, their eyes wrong in a way that's genuinely hard to look at for long. Scholars have an explanation, and it's a sober one, that these are shaman figures, images tied to hunting magic and trance and ritual. That's the mainstream reading, and it may well be right. What no one disputes is two things. The figures look like almost nothing else in North American rock art, and their age is uncertain. They're old. How old is an open question. And because they're so strange, other people have reached other conclusions. There are those who claim these patterned beings record something visiting from somewhere else, that the wrong heads and the filled-in bodies are a literal portrait, not a symbol. To be clear, that is a claim, not a finding, and the people who actually study Koso don't endorse it. But the figures are odd enough that the claim has followed them for decades, and standing in front of one, you understand why. Figures painted onto a wall are one thing. The next site is a calendar laid into the desert floor, and after that, the dates stop making sense entirely. Number 5. The Bristlecone Groves, White Inyo Range, California. High on the White Inyo Range, in the same thin air as those high villages, stand the oldest individual living things on the planet, bristlecone pines, some of them well over 4,000 years old. Trees that were already ancient when the Koso figures were carved. Trees that were standing before the first stone went into the Great Pyramid. Here's the twist that fits this list perfectly. We can date these trees with extraordinary precision, ring by ring, year by year, further back than almost any other record on Earth. And the human sites scattered through the same high country, the camps and the carvings beside them. We can barely date at all. The living wood keeps a flawless calendar. The human stone keeps none. The thing that's alive has outlasted and out-recorded every trace of the people who once worshipped in its shade. It's said The location of the single oldest tree is kept secret on purpose, not for the usual reasons, but because of what people did the last time the oldest one was found and identified. The Forest Service doesn't mark it. You can walk right past the eldest living thing on the planet and never know. A thing we can date that's older than history. Now we cross over into the things we can't date, and the first of them is a single boulder that's quietly in the wrong era. Number 4. The High Sierra Hunting Drives, Sierra Crest, California. Along the crest of the Sierra on the high alpine passes, there are low walls and stone blinds, structures built to funnel an ambush game as it moved through the mountains on its seasonal migration. They were used across thousands of years, and here is the detail that unsettles the people who study them. The animals still use the same routes today. Think about what that means. The people who built these drives read the mountains so precisely, its passes, its wind, the exact lines the herds would follow, that the routes they chose have held for 3,000 years and more. No maps, no survey instruments, nothing but observation passed down and built into stone, accurate enough that a hunter from 3 millennia ago and a deer from this morning would recognize the same path. How that knowledge was gathered, and how it stayed that exact across so long, is an open question. It's said something still works those high routes, that the drives never really went out of use, and that what waits along them now isn't hunting deer. These were traps for the living. The last 3 sites turn back toward the sky, and toward dates that simply refuse to hold still. Number 3. The Donner Summit Outlier, Summit Valley, California. Back to Donner Summit, but to one specific stone. When researchers worked through the summit carvings and assigned them their 3,500-year range, there was a boulder that didn't fit. Carvings on it that appear significantly older than everything around them, older than the window the rest of the site was assigned. One boulder doesn't sound like much, but follow what it does to the timeline. If those marks really are older, then the established date for when people first carved this high country is wrong, and the first carvers of the Sierra Summit become someone we haven't named and haven't accounted for. A presence before the presence we thought was first. It's a single rock quietly sitting in the wrong era, and a single rock in the wrong era is how the whole sequence starts to wobble. It said the older marks were already there when the later people arrived, and that you can see they carved around them, never over them, the way you'd leave room around something you didn't make and didn't dare deface. One boulder too old will keep an archaeologist up at night. An entire art complex too old, one where the dating methods openly contradict each other, is number 2. Number 2. The Koso dating problem. Koso Range, California. Koso comes back one final time, because Koso is where the central problem of this whole list stops being a background hum and becomes the entire story. How old is the Koso rock art? The honest answer is that it depends entirely on which method you trust. Date it by the slow build-up of varnish on the rock, and you get one answer. Date it by comparing the styles to other sites, and you get another. Date it by the projectile points found nearby, and you get a third. And the spread between those answers is not a few centuries, it's thousands of years. This is the meta loop of this video made completely literal. The number will not hold still, and the people who study it for a living say so, in print, in the published record. You can read 3 respectable estimates for the same carvings that disagree by longer than all of recorded history. It's said that underneath the oldest layer anyone has dated, there's an older one still, and that the people who made the layer we can see were themselves wary of whoever made the one beneath it. Art we can't pin within thousands of years is a fitting place to stand before the last one. Because number 1 isn't just hard to date. Number 1 is, as far as anyone can prove, the oldest of its kind on the continent, and its age cracks the timeline open completely. Number 1. The Winnemucca Lake petroglyphs, eastern foot of the Sierra Nevada. We end where we began. At the foot of the Sierra Nevada, on the shore of Winnemucca Lake, a lake that is now a dry basin, there are carvings in the stone, deep concentric circles, zigzags, wavy lines. For years, everyone knew they were old. Nobody knew how old. Then a team found a way in. When the lake stood high, its water had laid down a crust of carbonate over the lower carvings. Date the crust, and you get a minimum age for what's underneath it. The number that came back was at least 10,000 years, possibly closer to 15. That makes these the oldest known petroglyphs anywhere in North America, and it puts a human hand on this rock right at the very edge of when anyone is supposed to have been on this continent at all. The lead scientists' own words were that they knew the carvings were old. They just didn't know they were that old. Who made them is uncertain, because the makers come from before the cultures we have names for. There is no people to attribute them to. There is only the rock, the crust, and a date that sits the whole tidy timeline of this continent on its edge. It said the lake didn't dry up on its own, that the carvings were left as a warning about what drinking from that water would finally cost, and that the basin emptied to keep the warning from ever being needed again. That part is story. The date is not. The date is measured, published, and real, which is the thread that ran through every site we've stood at tonight. 15 sites, and one problem they all share. A village built too high for anyone to live, that people lived in anyway. A boulder carved in the wrong era. A calendar nobody can claim, still keeping time. Trees that out-record the people who worshipped beneath them. Carvings that 3 different methods date thousands of years apart. All down the spine of the Sierra Nevada, the timeline keeps cracking in the same place. Not because the evidence is thin, but because there's too much of it, and it's older than the story we were handed. Remember those carvings on the dried-up lake bed? The ones they dated twice because the first number was impossible. 10,000 years, maybe 15. Somebody stood on that shore and cut circles into the rock before there was a single written word anywhere on the face of the earth, before writing, before the wheel, before the oldest thing you think of when you think of the word ancient. The lake is gone now. The carvings aren't. They're still out there, on the shore of water that vanished before history began, waiting for someone to finally agree on how old they really are. And every year the experts go back and look again. The number only ever moves one way, older. So I'll leave it with you. Of everything we stood in front of tonight, which one cracked the timeline hardest for you? And which Sierra Nevada site did we miss? Put it below. Somebody watching